Welcome to Prep Nuggets CFA Level 1 Complete Portfolio Management course. Although portfolio management is of lower weightage for the Level 1 curriculum, it grows in importance for Levels 2 and 3. So if you're planning to progress to higher levels, building a good foundation here is essential. In this first lesson, we shall learn the portfolio approach to investing. Please treat this as an introductory lesson. Some new concepts are only described briefly and will be revisited in detail later, so don't worry if there are things you can't yet grasp. With that settled, let's dive right into our first lesson. You've probably heard of this saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's essentially the gist of portfolio management. An investor who places all his bets in a single stock is not taking the portfolio approach. He risks heavy losses if the basket breaks. When an investor takes a portfolio approach or perspective, he does not only hold a diversified portfolio of investments, but he also evaluates individual investments by their contribution to the risk and return of his entire portfolio. So why is this important? The obvious reason is that diversification helps investors avoid disastrous investment outcomes. There's no shortage of examples, but this is more commonly observed in business owners or lifetime employees of a company. Such individuals tend to hold too much of their company's shares, such that if the company goes bankrupt, they lose not just their jobs, but also a large portion of their investment portfolio. Investors can avoid such situations by taking a diversified portfolio approach, which is able to reduce the overall risk associated with their wealth without necessarily decreasing their expected rate of return. So how is this possible? Consider a portfolio of 3 different assets. If we calculate each of their mean annual returns and standard deviations for the period, we get the following figures. The average of the 3 assets will be as such. So guess what the risk is and return for a portfolio of these 3 assets in equal proportion. The portfolio return is, as expected, the average return of the 3 assets of 15%, but the standard deviation is actually lower than the average of the 3 standard deviations. This is an illustration of how risk is reduced, but not the expected rate of return when we diversify across assets. Studies of past returns on major markets conclusively support this. One measure of the benefits of diversification is the diversification ratio. It's calculated as the ratio of the standard deviation of the equally weighted portfolio to the standard deviation of the randomly selected security, which can be replaced by the average standard deviation of all the securities in the portfolio. So for our example, the diversification ratio is 18% over 24%, which is 0.75. This means that the portfolio's standard deviation is 75% of that of a security selected at random. Obviously, the lower the ratio, the higher the diversification benefit. One important thing to note is that an equal-weighted portfolio is not necessarily the portfolio that has the lowest possible standard deviation for this set of assets. There lies a set of weights that produces the minimum portfolio standard deviation for this group of assets, and computer optimization techniques can be used to calculate them. This is known as the Global Minimum Variance Portfolio, which we'll learn later in this course. Besides the weightage, another major factor that influences the effectiveness of diversification is the correlation of returns between the various securities. When the returns between assets are highly correlated, the benefits of diversification diminishes. Conversely, when the return between assets have little correlation, the benefits of correlation increases. However, even if a portfolio is made up of assets that have little correlation with each other, correlations tend to increase during periods of market turmoil. In the 2008 global financial crisis, almost all risky assets fell in value as investors panicked and rushed for the exits. So, as you can see, downside protection is limited even for a well-diversified portfolio. And that brings us to the modern portfolio theory. One of the principles of MPT is that some of the risk in assets is non-diversifiable, known as systematic risk. The asset-specific risk is diversifiable as we increase the number of securities in the portfolio. The main conclusion of MPT is that investors should focus on how individual securities in the portfolios are related to one another in order to achieve maximum benefit of diversification, which is to reduce the asset-specific risk of the portfolio. And that's our introduction to portfolio management. We shall go deeper into some of these concepts in the rest of the course. See you at the next lesson. Welcome back. This is an introduction to the different types of investors and the distinctions in their characteristics and needs. Before we begin, let's clarify the distinguishing characteristics that define an investor. The first is investment horizon, which is the length of time that the investor expects to hold the portfolio. The risk tolerance is the degree of variability in returns that the investor is able and willing to withstand. Investors with longer time horizon tend to have higher risk tolerance as they have the time to ride out any market volatility. The income needs is the degree of withdrawal needs expected from the portfolio. Do not confuse this with liquidity needs, which is to meet unexpected claims or withdrawals from the portfolio. We'll watch out for them. Investors can be broadly classified as individual investors and institutional investors. Individual investors save and invest for a variety of reasons, such as buying a home, children's education, and for retirement. Different types of investors will have different needs depending on what stage of life they're in.